There is a watchmaker with a shop nobody advertises. No website. No same-day replies. Some months he isn't taking new clients at all. And there is a waiting list 2 years long, made up of people who could buy anything they want, standing in line for a man who has never once asked them to. Here is what almost nobody understands about that watchmaker. He did not become rare by hiding. He became rare by refusing to be ordinary, and the world eventually noticed. That is the entire idea hiding inside this video, and by the time it ends, you will know exactly how to apply it to your own life. Most people are living the opposite story. They answer every message within minutes. They say yes before they have considered the cost. They explain themselves to people who never earned an explanation, and then they wonder quietly why nobody seems to treasure them the way they hoped. This is not bad luck. It is a pattern, and patterns can be broken. You are not going to become louder. You are not going to perform harder or chase more attention. You are going to do something more difficult and far more effective. You are going to become the kind of person whose absence is noticed before their presence ever is. 9 ideas make up what follows, and none of them work particularly well on their own. Skip the foundation, and the later ones will feel hollow. Skip the later ones, and the foundation alone will make you quiet, without making you valuable. Take them in order, because each one is built to support the one that comes after it. 1. The economics of rarity start with a question most people never bother to ask. Why does a diamond cost more than a bucket of sand, when sand is arguably more useful? The honest answer has nothing to do with beauty and everything to do with supply. Anything that exists in abundance gets treated as background noise, no matter how good it actually is. Anything difficult to obtain gets treated as significant, sometimes even when it isn't. This is not a flattering truth about human psychology, but it is an accurate one. People do not calculate your worth by asking how kind you are or how much you have to offer. They calculate it, often without realizing it, by asking how hard you are to reach. If the answer is not hard at all, something in their mind quietly files you under replaceable, even if they would never say that out loud. This explains a pattern you have probably lived through without naming it. The friend who is always free gets taken for granted. The employee who never pushes back gets handed the extra work nobody else wants. The partner who tolerates everything gets treated like tolerance is unlimited. None of this happens because these people lack value. It happens because their value was never protected by any sense of scarcity. So the people around them stopped noticing it was there. There is a useful way to picture what actually happens between two people in any interaction. Call it friction. Friction is the gap between what someone expects from you and what you actually deliver on demand. When you are instantly responsive, endlessly transparent, and perpetually available, the friction drops to nothing. The other person understands your exact limits and realizes your attention can be purchased for the price of a notification. When friction disappears, so does the respect that used to travel alongside it. Contrast that with anyone you have met who seem to operate on their own schedule, warm but never desperate. You likely paid more attention to them, not less. That reaction was not random. It was your own mind doing exactly what human minds have always done, assigning weight to what feels limited and quietly dismissing what feels unlimited. Picture 2 employees with equal skill inside the same company. One is available around the clock, answers instantly, never sets a boundary, and volunteers for everything. The other is selective. They protect blocks of time, they are not always reachable, and when a real crisis hits, Leadership does not think of the first employee first. They think of the second. Not because the first one contributed less, but because their constant presence diluted the sense that their attention meant anything. Abundance, even the abundance of effort, still reads as abundance. Understand clearly what this principle does and does not ask of you. It does not ask you to withdraw out of pettiness, to play games, or to manufacture fake unavailability so people chase you. Manipulation collapses the moment it is discovered, and it always is discovered. What this actually asks is more honest than that. Stop handing out your time, attention, and energy as if they cost nothing, because the moment you treat them as free, everyone around you will treat them as free too. From here on, treat access to you the way a serious craftsman treats access to his workshop. Not locked out of arrogance, but reserved for people and purposes worth the cost of entry. This single shift, treating your time as something with a price rather than something with no limit, is where every other idea in this video starts to take hold. 2. The discipline of restraint. Now consider a second lever that almost nobody trains on purpose. The discipline of staying quiet when every instinct says to speak. Watch how most conversations actually unfold. Someone makes a comment that stings, and the room fills instantly with a defense, an explanation, a counterattack. Silence, in most social situations, feels unbearable. People will say almost anything to avoid 3 seconds of it. That discomfort is exactly what gives silence its power. The person who can sit inside an uncomfortable pause without rushing to fill it is demonstrating something rare, that they are not run by the moment. And because most people cannot tell the difference between calm and confidence, they read your stillness as strength, whether or not you feel entirely steady on the inside. There is a second, quieter benefit to restraint that most people never notice. When you stop rushing to respond, you start actually listening, and people reveal an enormous amount about themselves when they believe no one is paying close attention. Their real priorities surface. Their actual intentions leak through the cracks of casual conversation. Meanwhile, the person busy composing their next sentence has already stopped gathering information. The second you react on someone else's timeline, they learn they can move you. That single realization changes the entire dynamic of a relationship. Once a person knows which words make you flinch, which silences make you panic, and which provocations make you explain yourself, they hold something over you whether they intend to use it maliciously or not. The person who can absorb a provocation without visible movement remains unreadable, and unreadable people are simply harder to manage. This does not mean becoming cold or withholding on purpose to seem mysterious. Restraint without warmth just reads as arrogance, and people see through that quickly. The goal is narrower and more useful than that. Before you explain yourself, ask whether the explanation is actually necessary, or whether it is simply anxiety asking to be soothed. Before you respond to a provocation, ask whether responding will change anything, or whether it will only prove that the provocation worked. Think about how a skilled negotiator operates. They do not fill silence with concessions. They let a pause sit on the table, sometimes for an uncomfortably long time, because they understand that the first person to speak after an offer is usually the one who ends up giving something away. That same principle applies far beyond negotiation tables. In arguments, in relationships, in the workplace. The person who can tolerate a pause almost always ends up with more leverage than the person who cannot. There is also a quieter cost to over-explaining that rarely gets discussed. Every time a decision is justified in excessive detail, it opens the door for debate. and debate invites doubt, both from the listener and eventually from yourself. A decision stated plainly tends to be respected as settled. A decision defended at length tends to be treated as negotiable, simply because the length of the defense signals it might be. Build this as a habit, not a performance. Before responding to criticism, take one full breath. Before agreeing to something out of social pressure, pause long enough to actually decide rather than default. This is not about talking less for its own sake. It is about making sure that when you do speak, your words carry the weight of consideration rather than the noise of reflex. 3. The architecture of self-command everything so far depends on a foundation that most people never bother to lay down properly, and that foundation is discipline. Not the dramatic all-or-nothing discipline you see in a highlight reel, but the boring, repeated discipline of doing the necessary thing on the days you do not feel like it. Here is the uncomfortable truth about motivation. It is not a reliable partner. It shows up when conditions are good and disappears the instant conditions turn difficult, which is precisely when you need it most. Anyone who has ever built something lasting, a business, a body, a skill, a reputation, did not build it on the days they felt inspired. They built it on the days they didn't, by relying on something sturdier than a feeling. Think of discipline less like a personality trait, and more like a structure you are constructing, brick by brick, decision by decision. Every time you follow through on something you told yourself you would do, even something small, you add a brick. Every time you break that promise to yourself, even quietly, even when nobody else would ever know, you remove one. Over months and years, that structure becomes either something solid enough to hold real weight or something too weak to trust. This matters more than it first appears, because self-trust is the quiet engine behind almost everything people call confidence. A person who has proven to themselves repeatedly that they follow through does not need external validation to feel sturdy. Suppose you decide you will work for 1 focused hour every morning before anything else touches your attention. The first morning is easy. The second is manageable. By the 20th morning, something more important is happening than the work itself. You are teaching yourself that your own decisions have consequences. You said you would do it, and then you did it. That is internal authority. And internal authority is powerful because you no longer need motivation to show up. You begin operating from identity instead of mood. The undisciplined person asks, "Do I feel like doing this?" The disciplined person asks, "What did I decide?" Those are 2 entirely different operating systems, and only one of them survives a bad week. Notice also what discipline does to how other people experience you. Reliability is rare enough that it functions almost like a form of wealth. The colleague whose word is dependable becomes the one people build plans around. The friend who shows up when they said they would becomes the one people confide in first. This is not about being impressive. It is about being provable, and provable reliability compounds in ways that talent alone never quite manages to. Discipline also has a defensive function that is easy to underestimate. The person who has trained themselves to delay gratification is far harder to manipulate, because most manipulation works by offering an immediate reward in exchange for a long-term cost. If you have built the muscle of saying no to the easy thing now, you become naturally resistant to the entire category of short-term traps other people fall into constantly. There is a common misunderstanding worth clearing up, because it stops a lot of people before they even start. Discipline is often imagined as a permanent state of intensity, gritted teeth, and constant sacrifice, which is exhausting to imagine and nearly impossible to sustain. The more accurate picture is quieter than that. It is closer to a series of small, unremarkable decisions made consistently enough that they eventually stop requiring willpower at all and simply become identity. None of this needs to be dramatic. It can start as small as finishing what you start, keeping the appointments you set with yourself, and closing the gap between what you say and what you do. Do that consistently enough, and it stops being an effort. It becomes simply how you operate, and other people notice long before you think they have. 4. The anchor principle. Now we move into something harder to build and far more valuable once it is built. The ability to stay steady when everything around you is not. Most people's emotional state is essentially borrowed from their environment. Something goes wrong, and their mood collapses with it. Someone is rude, and their entire day tilts around that single interaction. They are, in a very real sense, passengers in their own emotional lives. There is a different way to operate, and it has nothing to do with suppressing feeling or pretending nothing affects you. It has everything to do with creating a small gap between what happens to you and how you respond to it. In that gap lives your entire freedom. Without it, you are simply reacting, moment to moment, like a leaf carried by whatever wind happens to be blowing that day. Think of it the way a ship's anchor works. The anchor does not stop the water from moving. Waves still rise, storms still pass overhead, the surface still churns. But the anchor holds the ship in place regardless, because it is fixed to something deeper and heavier than the surface conditions. Your composure works the same way. You will still feel the sting of an insult, the heat of frustration, the pull of fear. The goal is not to feel nothing. The goal is to be anchored to something steadier than the weather of the moment. This matters because people are constantly, whether they realize it or not, testing where your anchor is. Someone pushes to see if you flinch. A situation escalates to see if you panic. And here is the part almost nobody explains clearly. Panic is contagious, but so is composure. In any group under pressure, people instinctively orient toward whoever seems least rattled, because calm reads as competence even when it hasn't been proven yet. Picture an actual emergency. One person starts shouting. Another starts assigning blame. A third freezes completely. And one person quietly asks, "What needs to happen next?" People naturally look toward whoever can still think clearly. That is authority without performance. You do not need to dominate the room. You simply need to remain useful inside it. There is also a strategic cost to visible reaction that most people never calculate. Every flash of anger, every flicker of insecurity, every visible crack under pressure hands the people around you real information. Here is the lever that moves this person. You do not have to hide your feelings from yourself. You simply do not need to broadcast every one of them to an audience that may not have your best interest at heart. There is a difference worth drawing clearly between composure and suppression, because the two are often confused, and the confusion causes real harm. Suppression is pretending a feeling isn't there, and unaddressed feelings tend to resurface later, usually at a worse time and in a worse form. Composure is something else entirely. It is fully registering the feeling internally while choosing, deliberately, when and how to let it show. One quietly builds pressure. The other builds control. Train this the way you would train any physical skill, in small repetitions before the big test arrives. Practice patience in traffic. Practice listening fully before responding when someone interrupts you. Practice waiting a few minutes before replying to an email that irritated you. None of these moments matter on their own. But you cannot expect yourself to stay calm during an actual crisis if you have spent every ordinary inconvenience rehearsing panic. By the time a genuinely difficult moment arrives, staying anchored will already be familiar territory rather than a skill you are attempting for the first time under pressure. One clarification matters here. Calm does not mean passive. Some of the strongest decisions get made by calm people precisely because they are not being made from panic. You can say no calmly. You can leave a bad situation calmly. You can confront a real problem calmly. The absence of emotional chaos is not the absence of strength. Often it means the strength has finally become organized. 5. The Machiavelli Connection. This is where a voice from 500 years ago has something important to say to you, and it is worth listening carefully. Niccolò Machiavelli spent his life studying how power actually works, not how people wished it worked. And buried inside his writing are two concepts that most people completely misunderstand. The first is vert. And no, it does not mean moral virtue in the way you might think. It means practical capability. It means the ability to act effectively when circumstances change. It is competence, adaptability, and decisive action wrapped into one word. The second concept is fortuna, fortune, or luck, or fate, or chance. Machiavelli pictured fortune as a chaotic, unpredictable river that could flood everything you had built. And here is the part that matters. He believed that a person with real vert could prepare for that river, build dikes and channels, position themselves so that when the flood came, they would survive and even thrive while others were swept away. This is not ancient history. It is a practical lesson for your life today. You cannot control the chaos that will enter your world. You cannot control the economy, the people who betray you, the opportunities that vanish, or the unexpected crises that appear without warning. But you can control your preparation. You can build your skills. You can strengthen your discipline. You can anchor your emotional state. And when the flood comes, and it always comes, you will be one of the few who is still standing. Machiavelli also warned about something else that is remarkably modern. He wrote that a leader must avoid being hated or contemptible. The modern version of that lesson is not about being feared. It is about not making yourself easy to destabilize. A person who can be pushed into any reaction becomes predictable. A person who can be ridiculed into changing course becomes weak. A person who can be flattered into bad decisions becomes manipulable. Your composure, your boundaries, your discipline, your emotional control. These are not just nice qualities. They are your protection against a world that will test you constantly. There is a quiet truth in Machiavelli that most people skip over. He did not say, be feared. He said, make yourself difficult to replace. And the way you do that is not through threats or intimidation. It is through building something inside yourself that no one else can easily duplicate. Competence that solves real problems. Composure that remains when everyone else panics. Boundaries that cannot be pushed. Reliability that becomes predictable in the best possible way. You cannot control fortune, but you can build vert. You cannot control chaos, but you can build preparation. You cannot control what others do, but you can control what you become. That is the Machiavellian lesson hiding inside every idea in this video. Rarity is not a trick. It is not a game. It is the accumulated result of refusing to be common while everyone else is busy chasing approval and attention. Build your capability quietly. Strengthen your composure deliberately. Guard your boundaries carefully. And when chaos arrives, and it always arrives, you will not be the one asking for help. you will be the one others turn to, because you are the one who is still standing. 6. The craft principle here is where the entire structure either holds or collapses, because everything up to this point, the scarcity, the restraint, the discipline, the composure, the Machiavellian preparation, means very little without something real underneath it. Mystery without substance is simply an empty room with the lights turned off. If people look closely and find nothing behind the calm exterior, the respect you have built evaporates the moment they figure that out. So the next question has to be asked honestly, without flattering yourself. What can you actually do that the people around you cannot easily replace? Not what you enjoy, not what you hope to be known for. What have you built real, demonstrable competence in? This is the uncomfortable homework most people skip, because it is far easier to look composed than it is to become genuinely, verifiably good at something. Return to the watchmaker from the opening. Nobody waits 2 years for him because he is mysterious. They wait because his work is better than anything they can find elsewhere, and the mystery only means anything because the substance is already there to back it up. Strip away the substance, and all that remains is a person pretending to be interesting, and pretending has a short shelf life. Building real competence is slow, and it is often invisible for a long stretch before it becomes obvious to anyone else. Nobody applauds the early repetitions. Nobody notices the hours spent getting slightly better at something most people will never even recognize as difficult. But that invisible period is exactly where the value gets built. Because if it were easy enough to be visible from day one, it would not be rare enough to matter. Ask yourself a harder question than most people ever ask. If you disappeared from the rooms you currently occupy for 30 days, what specific problems would go unsolved? What decisions would slow down? What knowledge would be missing? If the honest answer is almost nothing, the work in front of you is clear. You are currently occupying space rather than creating leverage. There is a compounding effect here that is easy to underestimate. Every skill you develop makes the next one slightly easier to acquire, because you are also building the meta skill of learning itself. Every problem you solve competently builds a reputation that brings you more significant problems to solve. This is why competence, unlike charm, tends to get more valuable with time instead of less. Charm is judged on the spot. Competence gets tested repeatedly, and it either holds up or it doesn't. There is a practical sequence worth following, and most people skip straight past it. First, choose one domain where real improvement would create genuine leverage in your actual life, not an imaginary one. Second, put in the volume of deliberate, sometimes boring practice that most people avoid. Third, stop announcing the work while it is still incomplete. Fourth, let the results arrive before the explanation does. There is also a difference worth noting between announced skill and demonstrated skill, because people respond to them very differently. A person who talks extensively about their abilities tends to be met with quiet skepticism, since claims are cheap and easy to make. A person whose work simply speaks for itself tends to be met with something closer to trust, because the proof arrived before the claim ever needed to be made. Let your output carry the announcement. It rarely needs your help. The instruction here is direct. Pick the one area where your skill gap is costing you the most credibility, and close it deliberately, not casually. Read the material that is slightly too advanced for you right now. Practice the part of the skill you are currently avoiding because it is the hardest. Ask for feedback that will actually sting, because flattering feedback teaches you nothing. Do this consistently, and you give everything else in this video something worth protecting. 7. The Gatekeeper Principle. Once there is something real worth protecting, the next task is protecting it. Because value without boundaries eventually gets worn down to nothing. Think about how a well-run gallery operates. It does not display every piece to every visitor at every hour of the day. Access is structured, sometimes by appointment, sometimes by invitation, and that structure is precisely what preserves the sense that what's inside is worth seeing in the first place. Most people run their own lives with no structure like this at all. They answer every request the moment it arrives, out of habit or anxiety rather than genuine willingness. They say yes to things they resent almost instantly, because saying no in the moment feels harder than the resentment that follows. Over time, this trains everyone around them to expect unlimited access. And unlimited access, by definition, cannot be treated as valuable. Here is the arithmetic that makes boundaries necessary rather than selfish. Your time and energy are finite resources, whether you acknowledge that fact or not. Every yes handed out carelessly to someone who has not earned it is quietly a no taken away from something or someone that actually deserves your attention, sometimes including yourself. Boundaries are not about being difficult. They are about making sure your limited resources go toward what actually matters to you. Notice, too, how boundaries are typically tested. Rarely does someone attempt a massive violation right out of the gate. Instead, they push gently, a small favor here, a minor exception there, watching to see whether the boundary holds or quietly dissolves under light pressure. If it dissolves, the testing continues, because human behavior generally takes as much room as it is given. Hold firm on the small requests, and you rarely have to fight over the large ones. There is also a communication style worth adopting here. Because how a boundary is delivered matters almost as much as the boundary itself. Learn to say things plainly. I won't be able to make it. That doesn't work for me right now. I've decided differently. No dramatic excuses, no elaborate apology, no defensive speech. A boundary stated plainly, without a lengthy justification attached, tends to be respected. A boundary buried under 3 paragraphs of apology and explanation signals, often unintentionally, that you are not entirely sure you are allowed to hold it, and people sense that uncertainty immediately. It also helps to distinguish clearly between a boundary and a wall, because the two get confused constantly, and confusing them leads people toward isolation rather than protection. A wall keeps everyone out indiscriminately. A boundary is selective by design, built to filter rather than to seal shut entirely. The goal was never to become unreachable. It was to make sure that reaching you actually requires something, so that the people who make the effort are the ones who genuinely value what's on the other side. Finally, extend this same gatekeeping to the people you allow closest to you, because proximity shapes behavior more than almost anything else in life. Spend enough time around people who complain, and complaining starts to feel normal. Spend enough time around people who chase comparison and status, and comparison starts to feel normal. Spend enough time around people with real standards, and those standards start to feel ordinary too. You do not need hundreds of people in your corner. You need a small number who respect truth, effort and boundaries, and who leave you feeling clearer rather than smaller after you spend time with them. Choose that circle with real intention. Protecting your access is not about becoming isolated. It is about making sure that what you protect is worth protecting, and that the people inside the circle are worth the room they take up. And remember, you are also part of someone else's circle. Do not demand qualities from other people that you have not built in yourself first. 8. The shadow principle there is a strategic advantage available to anyone willing to accept a small, temporary discomfort. The discomfort of being underestimated. Most people cannot resist the urge to announce their progress the moment it happens, to make sure everyone knows exactly how capable, how busy, how impressive they currently are. That urge is understandable, but it comes with a real cost that rarely gets discussed. When you broadcast your full position before you are finished building it, you hand everyone around you a complete map of your plans, your resources, and your intentions. Rivals adjust. Skeptics prepare their objections in advance. Well-meaning friends offer opinions before you have had the chance to test the idea yourself. None of this happens out of malice, in most cases. It simply happens because information, once shared, cannot be unshared, and other people will always use it in ways you cannot fully predict or control. There is real freedom available in the opposite approach. When people believe you are still developing, still ordinary, still no particular threat to their plans, they lower their guard around you. They speak plainly. They reveal their actual priorities rather than a curated version. Being underestimated, uncomfortable as it can feel in the moment, gives you room to work, adjust, and improve without an audience watching your every step and forming premature conclusions. This is not about deception. It is about timing. There is a meaningful difference between hiding your progress out of dishonesty and simply choosing not to narrate every stage of an unfinished process. A plan announced too early loses momentum to the doubt and unsolicited advice of people who were never going to help execute it anyway. A plan revealed only once it is substantially complete tends to land with far more force. Because the gap between what people expected and what actually happened does the persuading for you. There is also a protective element worth naming honestly. Visible early success tends to attract resentment as often as it attracts support, simply because human beings are wired to compare themselves to whoever appears to be pulling ahead. Moving quietly, without constant announcement, allows you to build strength before that comparison instinct in other people has a chance to activate against you. Think about the difference in outcome between two people pursuing the same goal. Say, learning a new trade or starting a small venture on the side. One tells everyone they know about it the day they begin, inviting opinions, doubts, and well-meaning discouragement before they have built any real momentum. The other quietly works at it for months, tells almost no one, and only mentions it once there is something concrete to show. The second version rarely faces the same resistance, simply because there was never anything visible early enough to resist. This does require conquering a specific kind of ego hunger. The ego wants immediate recognition. It hates being overlooked or misjudged even briefly. It wants to interrupt and say, actually, I already know about this, or let me tell you what I'm building. Treat that impulse as something to manage rather than obey. Whenever the urge to reveal or impress shows up, weigh it honestly. Is 10 seconds of validation from people who will forget it by tomorrow worth trading for real, compounding advantage later? None of this requires permanent secrecy or constant restraint. It simply requires a habit of discretion during the unfinished stages of anything that matters to you. Let your results speak first, and let your announcement, if there ever needs to be one, come only after the results have already made your point. 9. The compass principle there is one more chain to examine, and it is heavier than most people realize, because it operates quietly in the background of nearly every decision: the need for approval. It is the instinct that makes people agree with statements they don't believe, laugh at humor that doesn't land for them, or shrink an ambition because someone nearby might feel uncomfortable around it. Most people never name this pattern directly. They simply live inside it. This instinct is not a personal weakness so much as old wiring. For most of human history, being cast out of the group carried genuinely lethal consequences, so the nervous system learned to treat social disapproval as a serious threat. That wiring made sense for a very long time. It makes far less sense now, when the disapproval of a stranger who will forget your name within the hour carries none of the danger it once represented. The practical cost of unchecked approval seeking is significant. Decisions get distorted by the question of what others will think rather than what is actually true or useful. Voices get softened to avoid friction. Paths get chosen not because they are right, but because they are the least likely to provoke disagreement. A person pulled in a dozen directions by other people's expectations ends up, in the end, going nowhere in particular. There is a genuine paradox waiting on the other side of this pattern, and it is worth understanding clearly. The more visibly a person needs approval, the less approval they tend to actually receive, because neediness reads as a kind of instability that people instinctively pull away from. The moment that need begins to fade, respect tends to arrive on its own, almost as a side effect, because people are consistently drawn to whoever seems least dependent on their opinion. This does not mean rejecting all feedback or becoming immune to correction, because that would simply be a different kind of fragility wearing a different costume. The goal is discernment rather than defiance. Take criticism that is accurate and useful, regardless of how uncomfortable it feels. Discard judgment that carries no real weight, especially from people who have never walked anywhere near the path you are actually on. The difference between those two responses is not stubbornness. It is a functioning internal compass, one that points toward what is true rather than toward what is popular in the room. There is a useful test worth applying whenever an opinion is weighing on you heavily. Ask whether the person offering it has any real stake in the outcome, any relevant experience with the situation, or any track record worth respecting. If the answer to all three is no, that opinion has earned very little claim on your attention, regardless of how loudly or confidently it was delivered. Weight your listening according to relevance, not according to volume. There is a sharper mirror worth holding up here than any outside opinion could ever offer. Ask yourself plainly, would you respect someone who lived exactly the way you currently live? Would you trust his word? Believe his promises? Want him on your team? Or as a friend? Would you call him honest? Would you call him courageous? Your honest answer tells you exactly where the real work is, and it has nothing to do with what anyone else thinks of you. This is a far more useful compass than the shifting opinions of a crowd that will not remember its verdict by next week. Practice this the same way you would practice any other skill, in small situations before large ones. Say the honest thing in a low-stakes conversation instead of the comfortable thing. Let a minor disagreement stand instead of smoothing it over immediately. Each small repetition strengthens the same muscle, and over time, that muscle becomes strong enough to hold steady even when the stakes are considerably higher. 10. Becoming irreplaceable. Every principle covered so far converges here, because none of them were ever meant to operate in isolation. Scarcity without substance is hollow. Silence without warmth is cold. Discipline without direction is just rigidity. Composure without real competence is a performance waiting to be exposed. Machiavellian preparation without execution is just theory. But combine all of them together, consistently over time, and something happens that cannot be manufactured through any shortcut. You become genuinely difficult to replace. This is the actual difference between being liked and being needed, and it is worth being honest about which one you are actually building toward. Being liked is pleasant, and there is nothing wrong with it. But it is also common, easily won, and just as easily lost. Being needed operates on an entirely different level, because it is built on demonstrated value rather than temporary charm. And demonstrated value does not evaporate the first time you have a bad day. Notice what changes for a person who reaches this point. Boundaries get respected rather than resented, because their worth has already justified the boundary in other people's minds before the boundary was ever stated aloud. Distance gets tolerated rather than punished, because the value on offer is worth the wait. Absence gets felt as a genuine loss rather than shrugged off, because deep down, the people around that person understand there is no easy substitute waiting in line behind them. This is also where the earlier principles start reinforcing each other in ways that are easy to miss until you have lived through the shift. Composure becomes easier to hold on to once real competence backs it up, because there is less to feel anxious about underneath the calm exterior. Boundaries become easier to enforce once your time is demonstrably valuable, because the cost of losing access to you is now visible to the people on the other side of that boundary. Each principle quietly makes the next one more sustainable. There is also a version of this trap worth naming plainly, because it is easy to slide into without noticing. Becoming genuinely valuable is not the same as becoming secretly desperate to be needed. You can become so focused on being irreplaceable that you quietly start wanting people to depend on you. And that is not strength dressed differently. That is dependency wearing a better outfit. The strongest form of value does not sound like they cannot function without me. It sounds like when I am here, things become better. That distinction protects your character, and it also makes the value more durable, because it was never built on someone else's helplessness in the first place. None of this arrives quickly, and it is worth saying plainly that anyone promising an overnight transformation is not being honest with you. This is closer to compound interest than a single dramatic event. Small, consistent choices, reserving your time, holding your composure, sharpening your skill, guarding your standards, quietly accumulate until, at some point, you will not be able to pinpoint exactly. The accumulation becomes undeniable to everyone around you, including yourself. There will be a cost along the way, and it deserves acknowledgement rather than a glossy dismissal. Some people will misread your restraint as coldness. Some will resent the boundaries that used to not exist. Some relationships, built entirely on your previous unlimited availability, may not survive the shift, and that is a genuine loss worth grieving rather than pretending away. But the relationships and opportunities built on what you actually bring, rather than on how easily you could be used, are the ones capable of lasting. It is worth being honest, too, about what this path does not promise. It does not promise that everyone will understand what you are doing, or that every relationship built on your old habits will survive the transition intact. Some people benefited, whether they realized it or not, from the version of you that gave everything away without question, and a portion of them will not be pleased to see that version go. That reaction says more about what they were used to than about anything wrong with the choice you are making. There is also a patience required here that runs against the grain of how most self-improvement gets marketed. Nobody becomes rare in a weekend. Nobody builds real competence in a month, or trains genuine composure through a single difficult conversation. This is slow, unglamorous work, closer to tending something over years than assembling something over a few determined days. The upside is that slow, well-built things tend to last, while anything constructed quickly for the sake of appearances tends to collapse the first time it is genuinely tested. Return, one final time, to the watchmaker from the beginning. His shop is quiet. His hours are limited. His answers do not come instantly. And none of that has ever once been a problem for the people willing to wait. Because what they are waiting for is real. That is the target. Not noise, not constant visibility, not performing value for an audience that will forget you by tomorrow. Something real enough and rare enough that people would rather wait for you than settle for whoever happens to be available right now. Start with one principle from everything covered here, whichever one struck the deepest nerve as you were listening, and apply it this week, not someday. Reserve one piece of access you have been giving away too freely. Hold one boundary you have been quietly ignoring. Sit inside one uncomfortable silence instead of rushing to fill it. Ask yourself, honestly, what you are actually building competence in, and whether it could withstand real scrutiny if someone looked closely tomorrow. None of these changes will announce themselves loudly, and that is exactly the point. The people around you will not necessarily notice the day it begins. What they will eventually notice, without being able to fully explain why, is that something about how they treat you has shifted. They will start asking rather than assuming. They will start valuing the time you give them because they can sense it is no longer unlimited. And somewhere along the way, without a single dramatic announcement, you will have become the kind of person whose absence leaves a room quieter than it used to be, and whose presence, when it finally arrives, was always worth the wait.